the first component of our vision is to make it ridiculously easy and fast for any business to make a payment and get access to financial services. We're going to do a lot of work on really helping these businesses save money.
Yeah.
And a huge portion of that is actually the analytics piece.
That then allows you to start building an entire ecosystem of financial services solutions around it and not just stopping where it is.
I think this is clearly not a winner-take-all market.
Agree.
A company like Pluto is only enabled by partnering with a financial institution in every market that it operates in. The power of innovation in the future is going to be through collaboration.
It's open economy.
Absolutely.
Welcome to today's episode of Culturenomics with Arjun Singh. I'm your host, Arjun. Today I'm joined by Mo Aziz, who's co-founder and CEO of Pluto. I've known Mo for a couple of years in different roles, and I'm really looking forward to the next 30 minutes to discuss both his current venture and stuff he's done in the past. Mo, welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Arjun. It's a pleasure being on Culturenomics and excited to spend the next 30 minutes jamming on a bunch of cool things.
All right. And I hope you're comfortable on the couch.
Couch is awesome.
All right. Great. Awesome. So, Mo, I think we've known each other, 3 years?
Yeah, something like that. I think we first met in 2019, something.
Exactly. And you were at that time the CEO and co-founder of, I think, one of the first open banking infrastructure players called DAPI.
That is correct.
And we threatened to do something together. I was at Alpha Team at that time. And obviously, for whatever reasons, things didn't get executed. And then I think we bumped into each other. And then you surprised me with the fact that you had actually left DAPI. What was behind that?
So it came off as a shocker to a lot of people, right? DAPI was obviously my baby. And it was technically, although I've had multiple venture attempts, actually not really venture attempts, but business attempts, this was the first real tech venture. What took me away was really co-founder conflict. And co-founder conflict was a result of incompatible co-founders. And this is not to say that, any of us are bad or good or this is not to point fingers at anybody, but this is the same as cliche as it sounds. It's the same as, finding a life partner that you can spend the rest of your life with. Sounds super cliche, but truth be told, you spend more time with your business partner than your life partner.
We do have some parts of the world that divorce rates are nearly 50%, so you're okay.
Absolutely, right? So, for us, the reality is that it just came back to the fact that from the very early days that we started off, it was just very evident that we were very different as people. We tried to make it work, but eventually that translated into conflicts and just a bunch of different disagreements. Again, where there was no right, no wrong. And I just felt like if one of us did not step down, I just felt like the company would stagnate. And that is where it was just very important for me to then step down, move on, and start again.
No, I think good on you. And I don't call it a step down. I think you stepped up, right? And I think sometimes to exit at the right time is much better than to let the pain carry on. Because as you said, it then starts to manifest itself in a number of different ways, which is counterproductive to the whole ambition. Right. In any case, let's put that behind us and let's talk about Pluto. DAPI aside, right? Open banking, open finance, open economy. This is, this is real, right? Although it might have taken a few years to start, influencing the marketplace in the Western economy, it's becoming very real, and it will become real here. Saudis is rapidly going down that path. Bahrain is ahead. Obviously, UAE will follow soon in some footsteps. Talk about open banking and how you guys, or how you as an individual see it, in the sense that, what do you think are sort of the key ingredients of success for open banking or open finance to really deliver the kind of value to the consumers, the customers, which could be B2B, which could be corporates, and the overall ecosystem?
Sure. So a couple of different things, right? One is that, I'm still a huge believer in the fact that, given the momentum across the fintech space, I think the infrastructure obviously has to catch up, and open banking is just such an integral component. I mean, if you think of the United States or other countries with slightly more mature open banking ecosystems, companies like Plaid power majority of all of those fintech use cases and so forth. So I think we will get there in MENA. I just think it's going to be a slightly longer journey, and this boils down to a couple of different things. Um, Firstly, when we first started DAPI, for instance, we took a very Plaid-like approach where we said, you know what, we're going to build this out on the basis of a user's permission. We used technology, including web scraping, automation, etc., to make this possible. Given the fact that banks did not have open APIs, and even today, a lot of the banks just don't have open APIs, right? But truth of the matter is that if you had to dissect two pieces out of within the open banking stack, you've got data and you've got payments. Getting access to financial data using, let's say, slightly hacky mechanisms like building out automation and scrapers and so forth, that is that's like fairly okay and like it's doable. But the real juicy stuff is automating bank payments and building out that functionality. And what we found is that building that component within the MENA ecosystem becomes extremely challenging and difficult should the banks not have a buy-in and should regulators not have, that buy-in. And the good is that at least fast forward to now, we're finally seeing companies like Tarabat Gateway, like Lean and DAPI actually building real partnerships with these banks. And, at least the good out there is that we know that this is going to happen. The big question mark is that how long is this going to take? We know that, banks have definitely been fairly notorious on, not the fastest innovation. And I think this is where it's going to be very interesting to see how the pace at which these rollouts happen.
No, that's true. And I think my biggest fear, sitting on the other side of the fence here, is that I think most banks are developing a deeper understanding of what open banking, open finance might mean for them.
Totally.
But the vast majority still approach this from a compliance perspective to say, as long as we're compliant with what the regulator wants us to do, it's fine. I think most of them are really struggling to actually see where's the real value for them, right, in terms of monetary value creation. I think that concern of disintermediation is genuine. I think it is. I think there is also a concern with regards to the maturity of the fintech sector and the risk they're actually taking working with some of the fintechs who might be here today, might not be there tomorrow. And I think it's, while we can easily blame the banks for being slow, I do think that partly is justified, right? Because at the end of the day, there are a number of aspects which they need to consider, and I think reputational risk is one, right? And we have seen a number of fintechs come and go in this part of the world too, right? One of the sectors I look at very closely is BNPL. I actually fear that there's a bloodbath waiting to happen there, right? And not just what's happened in Australia, but in the sense that they're in the public sector, they're in the public markets and their stock prices drop. But I think some of these BNPL players just don't have sustainable models. But that's my personal opinion, right? It's my personal opinion. Let's switch to your latest venture, right? You call it you call Pluto a corporate spend management platform, right? Deconstruct that for me. It's a mouthful. So give me the component parts.
Cool. So I think let's start off with what is Pluto's vision and what are we trying to do? And then we go downwards from there.
Sure.
So at a high level, at Pluto, what we aspire to do, at least, the first component of our vision is to make it ridiculously easy and fast for any business to make a payment and get access to financial services. Coming from like an SMB background and a family background where, my dad's been running different SMBs in the region, it's just very evident that this segment has been underserved dramatically across various fronts, not just financial services, but, across various fronts as a whole, which we can dive into after. But for now, the path that we choose to take is financial services for SMBs. Talking about payments and financial services, the first component that we're starting off with is really making it a lot easier for a business to incur operational expenses or for a business's employees to incur operational expenses. And this happens through Pluto's card offering. We call it a smart corporate card.
Okay.
And the reason why we call it a smart corporate card, today what happens is that, we've noticed businesses that fall into two camps. Camp one are traditional SMBs that land up distributing tons of loose cash to employees to incur business expenses. This could be a driver that's filling fuel. It could be an operational staff that's going out there, to collect document, whatever it may be. And then camp two are slightly, let's say the more modern businesses, whereby they've got a lot of expenses that need to be incurred online. It could be a marketing department spending on Google ads and Facebook ads and so forth. And what happens today is that a lot of these businesses only have access to a single corporate card, be it corporate debit or credit that's connected to their entire bank balance, or that's connected to the entire credit limit of that business. And this makes it exceptionally risky to hand that card over to, let's say, one of the folks in the marketing department. And beyond that, there's just tons of other issues from reconciliation, et cetera, et cetera. So at Pluto, what we do is we just make it ridiculously easy for any business to connect their bank account to Pluto, regardless of whatever bank they're using in the UAE, eventually across MENA. You can then, you can then immediately create a virtual or physical card, assign it to any employee, and set a spending limit. Beyond that, you can set category restrictions to make sure that the employee isn't saying that he needs a limit to spend on Google ads, but lands up going and buying presents for his girlfriend. And beyond that, we've got integrations with accounting tools and chat messaging apps like WhatsApp, so that receipts can be collected on the fly, can be reconciled directly into accounting tools and ERP tools and so forth.
And I'm assuming you're going to provide some analytics on top of it.
Oh, totally. That is literally step two for us. So, part one of the mission is just making it possible, or rather making it easier for these businesses to incur expenses. And beyond that, we're gonna do a lot of work on really helping these businesses save money.
Yeah.
And a huge portion of that is actually the analytics piece, and that's what we're going to build out next.
And I think that, and I'm sorry if I'm stepping out of line here, but I think that then allows you to start building an entire ecosystem of financial services solutions around it, and not just stopping where it is. Now, if you're able to execute this, and I'll use this word, it would be godsend, right? Because I'm an old hag, or well, I'm not a hag, but I'm an old person here, and for as long as I remember, every economy, every part of the world I go to, everybody talks about how the SMEs are the engine behind the economy, and everybody should be supporting them. But I think the financial services sector has particularly let them down, right? And for some parts, for good reason, right? But for other parts, it's just because they just couldn't be bothered, right? It is too hard. There are too many of them. They're hard to acquire, right? And I guess I'm sure you've got it all figured out. I'm not going to ask you to sort of spill the secret sauce out here, right? Because this space is actually going to get quite competitive. We're seeing globally this space getting quite competitive, and it seems like quite hot, quite attractive. The VCs are coming into it. I think one of the conversations you mentioned, you have Ramp as one of your lead investors, right? Very impressive. I'm very impressed by Ramp with what they're doing. Obviously, just as someone who's an observer, how did that happen?
Yeah, so that's actually a very interesting story. So the backstory to Ramp is that I had met with one of the Ramp co-founders, Karim Attia, in 2019 while I was building DAPI and while I was in San Francisco during our Y Combinator cohort. And then beyond that, we stayed in touch, and I actually pinged him again back in July, August of last year, when, again, financially, I was put in such a position where, although, B2B payments is kind of the space that I'm super passionate about and the space where I've always aspired to build something in, I got to a point where, I just thought that I wouldn't build another company anytime soon, just given circumstances. And the one company that I truly looked up to and that I believed in a lot was Ramp. And in July, August of last year, while I was in the US, I get in touch with Kareem Atiyeh for a potential role at Ramp. And I start interviewing and, met up with Joff, their head of product, and a bunch of other folks. And while those conversations were happening, I just so happened to come back to Dubai for my sister's wedding. And again, due to multiple reasons and just, touching base with folks I knew in the region, it just seemed like there wasn't a better time than now to be building this company for the region. And when I kind of switched gears and moved on from joining a corporate card company to building Pluto, I hit up Kareem again. I let him know that, hey, listen, I think I've changed my mind a bit. I think I'm going to build out this company for MENA. And he didn't even flinch. 2 weeks later, we're chatting, and Ramp was an investor.
Awesome. So obviously you're co-founders with a couple of other people.
Yeah, so I've got Ridwan, who's our chief product officer, and Naeem, who's our CTO.
And so talk a little bit about them. What are their backgrounds and sort of how is it going to work this time? How are you making sure that the chemistry is right this time?
So interesting story, right? Let me start with how I know them first.
Right.
So Ridwan, who is our chief product officer, I've known him since high school. We go back to year 7, year 8. And, Ridwan was the reason that I probably passed my physics and mechanics exams back in school days.
Okay.
I'd be the kid that would skip a bunch of classes. Again, at the time, I still had a very entrepreneurial spirit back then. I was trying to run an e-commerce store that would lead me to leave classes and answer calls. Ridwan, on the other hand, was the guy who sat all the way in the front. And I've known him since back then. And Naeem, who's a mutual friend, I've known him for the last couple of years as well. I met him through Ridwan. And I think the difference over here is that I'm working with folks whom I've known for such a long time, where, there are no filters in our relationship. And I think, that becomes one of the most important things that I look for when I'm starting a company with different folks, where are we, aside from obviously mentality and do we have a similar thought process and similar ambitions and so forth, are we so comfortable with each other as to where respectfully there are no filters? And I think that gives me a lot of comfort. Mm-hmm. And that becomes the winning factor in this relationship.
Good. Let's circle back to Pluto, right? So you're out there. There's no doubt that we both agree, or I guess the wider market agrees, that there is massive demand for what you have to offer because they are generally underserved. But also the SME segment is generally reluctant, right? Reluctant because they are unaware, reluctant because there is a lack of trust, reluctant because a lot of them have not dealt with fintechs, right? How do you intend to overcome that? So what are you going to do differently? How are you going to go to market differently? How are you going to convince them? And I'm not asking you to spill your beans out here and sort of share your secrets, but it is a genuine challenge, at least because I've been observing the sector for years. I've been actually writing about it. I don't know if you read any of this stuff, but I consistently write. I at once threatened to nearly launch an SME product myself, which was an ecosystem solution with a financial services backbone. Never happened because I guess the entrepreneurial instinct in me doesn't bright that light doesn't bright. Is not that bright. How are you going to do that?
So a couple of things, right? Firstly, the order in which we target SMEs is very important, meaning that we start off with targeting SMEs that are most likely to adopt our technology, and then really focus and double down on the ones who are least likely to generally adopt new technology slightly after. And the tactic we use for that is, we believe in taking an approach where we don't want any SME to change behavior, to change their existing stack, to change their existing technology stack. And that is the angle that we take. And with that, what I mean, again, I'm trying to think through how I can word this together without spilling any beans out here. But essentially what we do is really kind of look at what does the SME do today? Mm-hmm. How do they manage that problem today? And we really mimic their workflows and make them better, enhance them, and just target those pain points and go to them telling them, hey, look, you do exactly what you're doing today, but ABC problem that you were facing all this time, you're not going to have that anymore.
Okay, but let me stop you because I do want to go in a bit deeper here,
Sure.
right? So SMEs, firstly, the whole term of SMEs is just too wide, right?
That is true.
It's the two-man shop to, I don't know, 5,000 people, whatever the definition is, but it's incredibly wide. You have different sectors.
Mm-hmm.
You have different level of technological maturity, right? You have different level of process maturity, right? And obviously there are different levels of need, right? How do you get your head around all this, right? Because while I totally appreciate you've taken one lever or one criteria, which is the maturity curve in terms of, I guess, their familiarity with accepting third-party technology is being one.
Mm-hmm.
How are you getting your head around all of this? And let me add another sort of dimension to it, just to make it a little bit harder. I'm sure you're going to be looking at go-to-market partners, right? Because one of the key components for success in this sector has got to be scale, right?
Absolutely.
And you've got to manage your CAC or your cost of customer acquisition, at a level which is feasible. And that adds another dimension, right? Because then you have a channel partner and you've got to accommodate the channel partner's needs because he or she or that company has as a. So how are you going to actually solve for that?
Sure. So, okay. So part one was how are we navigating? If I understood correctly, how are we navigating
multi-dimensions?
All like SMEs. So so wide scope. So a couple of things right over there. Where firstly, we narrow it down by industry, by sector, and the reason why we do that, we believe in really kind of targeting deep pockets of one type of a customer and one type of an industry, and really doubling down on that to make sure that this
Good
ecosystem of customers are very happy. I would love to kind of mention the industries that we're targeting right now, but
That's fine.
we can't.
That's okay.
And that's kind of how we continue, moving along the sea of different SME segments. In terms of go-to-market and channel partners, you're 100% correct. And we have taken the approach of already, we've already started building these out, and we've already started partnering with, with some of the largest organizations who've got exposure to hundreds of thousands of SMEs across the region.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is the approach. Was there something else you asked?
No, that was the question. And is your product, it's good, is it pay as you go? Is it a subscription based model? Is it all of it? Are you commercially flexible? What's the whole?
So here's the interesting part. We still haven't finalized what we're going to charge when it comes to, the subscription fee. So Pluto at its base level will always remain a free product.
Mm-hmm.
It will always remain a free product up until a certain number of employees. And beyond that, there is going to be a subscription fee, one for every additional employee that's added, and eventually an enterprise plan.
Yeah.
But aside from that, we're going to have Pluto Premium, which is going to have a bunch of interesting functionality for which we will potentially charge a subscription fee, but that is yet to be determined. And this is something we're going to determine along the way. Initially, for our first 50 to 100 customers, the product is potentially going to be free for the first year or 2 years, but there are definitely going to be perks for early adopters, and that's going to help us dictate what the pricing should be.
And your focus is the UAE, or are you going to be MENA wide?
So we're looking at all of MENA,
Okay.
which includes the UAE, Saudi, Egypt, Pakistan, potentially Turkey, maybe perhaps in the far out future, we might kind of move more Southeast Asia as well. But let's see.
All right. That's pretty impressive. Right. So last question before we finish, and I'm conscious of time, right? Lots of competition, right? In the last couple of months, I've actually met and spoken to a couple of your peers. Some of them have been kind enough to even approach me and suggest that I should come onto their advisory board, which I firmly refused because I said I can't help a sector that I don't know that well. How do you stand out?
So a couple of things. So firstly, I think this is clearly not a winner take all market.
Agreed.
And this becomes very evident just looking at, the likes of Ramp and Brex and Airbase and incumbents like Concur and the swarm of other platforms across the US. Yeah. Two is that we don't have a single live player across all of MENA.
That's true.
So we're just at the beginning. And three is that with the product that we're building today, we're just scratching the surface. And why I say this, if you look at the US, we've seen a new wave of corporate spend management platforms come about in the last couple of months. Mm-hmm. There's a company called A2B, for instance, that's basically building Brex Ramp for the logistics and transportation sector.
Right. So they're going thematic.
Yeah. Where a company like Ramp or Brex gives you Slack rewards and AWS credits, this company gives you free tires and oil changes.
Okay.
So I think, that being said, we're really stepping into uncharted territory, and this is just the beginning. I do strongly believe, though, that there will be a lot of consolidation. There will be a couple of very large players, some not so large, and I also think that aside from businesses focusing on corporate spend, I think startups across the board doing, whether it's B2B e-commerce, whether it's other forms of B2B lending, a lot of these companies in about 10 years from now will look very similar.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And actually, to be honest with you, there is a positive to getting competition because it increases awareness, it reduces the cost of education. There are advantages of having other players who are similarish to you all in the market, because then you can actually build the market. And I completely agree. There is so much, I guess, land to cover here.
Absolutely.
That this is definitely not a winner take all market. And even if it was to turn into that, you are quite far from that. I'm going to ask you one last question. Sure. I knew that was the last question.
Go for it.
How are you going to, how do you think the banks are going to respond to that? Because this has been an area that a number of the smaller banks have always wanted to focus on, right? So, and there are quite a few. If you just take the UAE in the market, outside of the big 4 or 5, there's actually a whole cadre of sort of, small to medium banks who have tended to focus on SME solutions, right? What do you see them doing? Do you see them come and acquire companies like you? Do you just see them as saying, okay, we'll partner and take a small part of the pie, and they just want to really focus on the lending and deposit side rather than the technology and the facilitation side? How do you see the banks play out? What role, are they even worried right now?
Yeah, so I think today the banks are probably fairly comfortable. It's just very evident looking at the very large enterprise focus that majority of the banks in the region have. Mm-hmm. My thesis, though, is that in the time to come, again, if you think about enablement today, a company like Pluto is only enabled by partnering with a financial institution in every market that it operates in. So we're, if anything, we're actually friends of the banks. However, I think given the fact that we've got a fairly large number of players coming about, I think there's definitely, in time to come, there's definitely going to be a war on, potentially a bidding war, where banks will want to partner, banks will get into a bidding war to partner with companies like us in the coming years. And then 2, I think, as you correctly mentioned, the acquisition play. I think we will definitely start seeing acquisitions by these banks. And beyond that, I think there are just so many different ways of collaborating and working together. And we've seen this around the world, right? For example, when you log into Wells Fargo in the US, and when you as a consumer, for instance, and when you click on invest, they've got invest via Acorns as a product that's built in, right? So we could totally imagine a future where local banks have spend management as a product within their banking suite, and that's powered by Pluto.
Yeah.
Or pay a vendor that's powered by Pluto, and a lot of that functionality actually being powered by Pluto. Again, these are all question marks. We've not really thought through how.
Yeah, but I like the fact that you're thinking in that way, and I think it is essential to think in that manner. That this is an ecosystem play, and there are multiple roles or guises that you can play in. And I think that's commendable. I'm not saying that just because you're a friend and I've known you for a while. I think a lot of fintechs sometimes come with a very close-minded approach to it, and I think it's good to hear that you are thinking that way, because I do think that's pretty much how the market will play out. And there will be players like you who might actually want to go get licensed and become NBFCs and possibly, go in and compete with banks directly too. So you're going to have both sides of the play, right?
Just jumping in over there, right? Like, if you think of some of the largest companies in the world, imagine if Google Maps was a standalone product. We would, there'd be such a lack of innovation around the world if a company like Google did not open up APIs or did not, offer imagery to different companies and so forth. And I think the future is very, the power of innovation in the future is going to be through collaboration.
It's open economy.
Absolutely.
Right? Here we come to open economy. Mo, thank you for coming. I must say, and I mean that, I love the branding, Pluto. I don't know why it sort of, initially it goes mind to, was it Snoopy's dog? I don't know. Whose dog is Pluto, right? But
somebody else said that too.
Yeah, but it's a great brand, and I genuinely wish you the very best,
you very much.
And your co-founders, right? And obviously we'll stay in touch. And thank you for coming for the show today.
Awesome, Arjun. Thank you so much. Really, really, really appreciate it, and thank you very much for having me on.
Excellent. Right. So with that, I'll say goodbye. We had Mo Aziz, who's co-founder and CEO of Pluto, which is solving the problems for the SMEs, right? And I'd rather put it that way, or solving the financial services issues for the SMEs. Thank you, and we'll see you at the next episode. Goodbye.